Here's how I went about replacing my old defective MacBook Pro battery using one I bought on eBay, and how it worked out, including restoring the ability to use the trackpad. A while ago I noticed I couldn't use the trackpad on my early 2011 MacBook Pro, and then I noticed my battery was bulging up, which was blocking the trackpad from being pressed and pushing the case apart. And when I researched the issue, I found you can still run the laptop plugged in to the wall without a battery. It'll just go at a lower speed. When you take the screws out of the bottom of the case, you'll find that 3 of the screws up near the monitor hinge are going to be longer than all the others. It's just a regular Phillips to get the laptop apart, but then you need the special tri-wing security screwdriver to get the battery itself out. Luckily I had one on hand. First, you unplug the battery from the motherboard just by pulling up on the plug. Then you take the tri-wing screwdriver, get those 2 screws out, and the battery should just pull out. So since I'm not putting a battery in right away, I just put those 2 tri-wing screws back in place, and I put the laptop back together. And with the battery out of the way, the trackpad was able to push down again. So I put the laptop back together and started using it on just the charger power. I wanted to look up an aftermarket replacement battery, so I needed the model number, and I saw it on the battery I removed. For mine, the model number is A1322. And another way to get the battery model number is to click on the Apple icon up in the top bar, click About This Mac, and it will show here it's a MacBook Pro 13-inch Early 2011. So I can use that to look it up online. And of course, all kinds of links will come up about places you can buy a replacement battery and how to install it. So you can find the part number this way. And there's all kinds of prices. I think the most expensive I saw is $116, but the cheapest I saw was probably around here, $35 on eBay. And these are pretty much all aftermarket. So for my purposes, considering how old the laptop is anyway, and I use it mostly as a desktop system, I don't really mind if the quality is not that great, like if it can't hold a charge very long. For $35, I went with one of these options on eBay. When I received the replacement laptop battery, it came with a little instruction manual and 2 screwdrivers. One is a regular Phillips to get the case itself apart, and the other is the security tri-wing screwdriver. So again, I took the bottom off the laptop, took out those 2 security screws with the included screwdriver. Then I put the replacement battery in, lining it up so that any screws will be in the right position. It can only really go in one way. And then I plugged in the battery connector. It just pushes straight down and snaps into place. Then I put those 2 tri-wing security screws back in, and it was time to put the cover back on. Once it was back together, I powered it on, and the battery was about 70% charged. So I proceeded to charge it all the way and then started some testing. While I was running the laptop with no battery installed, and using the Coconut Battery app, in this case, to look at the battery statistics. Of course, there's no battery, and given that this is a 2.3 gigahertz processor, I was only running at 0.8 gigahertz, or 800 megahertz, which is about 1/3 of my capable running speed. So it's possible to run the system with no battery, it's just going to be crippled. So just after I installed the battery, I got my full 2.3 gigahertz speed back, but I noticed the battery had less capacity than stated on the label. It was supposed to be a 5800 milliamp hour capacity, but the battery statistics said the design capacity is only 4400 milliamp hours. And it said it's only on its first cycle, it's in good condition, and it was only manufactured at the end of 2018, about 4 months before I received it. So again, knowing I only spent $35 on it, for my purposes, I didn't really care about this. I just need the thing to run at 2.3 gigahertz as a desktop machine. So depending on what you need, you might want a more expensive battery to start with, and maybe you'd want to buy it somewhere other than eBay where it's a lot easier to get support. So even though the design capacity was 4400 milliamp hours, the full charge capacity was only 4277 milliamp hours, not even the original design capacity. So it was as if the battery's already lost some of its ability to hold a charge. So I wanted to do several discharge cycles over time, and over about a 2-week period, I purposely used it on battery power only and let it go down to about 15% or so, just to gauge how long I can run and to just see if the battery holds up. So for reference, this is my first cycle count. So this was partway through discharging my first time. Our full charge capacity is 4277, and after this cycle, when I charged it back up and let it drain again, on cycle number 2, I still had the same full charge capacity. To go from 100% down to about 15%, it took between an hour and a half to 2 hours under heavy use, which I defined as whatever I was doing on it, the fan had to be running most of the time. So I was heavily using the system, plus it had to power the fan, etc. Then when I recharged and eventually let it discharge again on a third cycle down to about 15%, I got closer to 2 hours, and this time it was mostly medium use, so the fan might be on about half the time. But then toward the end of the cycle, the fan was coming on a lot more, so medium to heavy use. But this time I noticed my maximum charge capacity was even lower now. I could only charge it back up to 4149 milliamp hours instead of 4277. So I did this another 2 cycles, and on one of these cycles I was using it mostly light duty, so the fan barely had to come on and I wasn't doing too much. Maybe I was just browsing the web mostly instead of doing things like video editing and other heavy-duty disk access. And with light use, I got about 3 hours and 15 minutes, from 100% down to about 15% battery. So for these last 3 cycles, the full charge capacity has stayed the same, and from here I'm going to have to keep an eye on that, see how things go as I get more cycles. But again, at this point, I'm going to mostly use this as a plugged-in desktop system anyway, with occasional battery use to help keep the battery conditioned. So in the end, if the battery can at least stay intact and have some amount of functionality in it to allow me to run the processor at full speed, then for me, for $35, this was an okay purchase. Depending on what you need out of a battery, maybe you need to take a different route, but at least now you know what happens when you go the cheapest route. As I get more use out of this battery, maybe I'll do a follow-up video to show how things went after this point.